Is this the greatest power in the universe?
Greetings, welcome to Canon Fodder presented by Pokemon Go. I'm Max Scoville of Midgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose to unpack this week's episode of Loki. Marvel's Master of Mischief is back to his old tricks on Disney Plus, and he might just be in over his head this time. So much so that whatever happens, there's a great chance this series could impact the entire MCU moving forward. Directed by Kate Herron, the series not only gets very multiversy very quickly, but it also sets up what very well could be a bigger deal than Thanos and the Infinity Stones. But before we get into all that, I have to warn you, this particular timeline is veering way off course and straight into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen Loki yet, or you have and you just don't want to hear more about it, now would be the best time to quietly exit the room while we sort it out.
Now, hang on just a minute.
Okay, now that we're past the spoiler warning, let's get right to it. This is a multiverse show. An alternate version of Loki is jumping around time and space with Owen Wilson's character, Agent Mobius. They are hunting another deadly time-space fugitive who just happens to be another version of Loki. Confusing? Exactly. Here's a quick recap to show you how we wound up there. The series opened how a lot of us expected. Loki grabbing the Tesseract in Avengers Endgame, dipping out through a portal, and now we finally see where he ends up. Crash landed in the deserts of Mongolia, where he promptly gets right back on his bullshit.
I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose.
But he doesn't get very far because these fourth-dimensional rent-a-cops pop through a time door to put a stop to it. They're Minutemen agents and they're working for the TVA, and they're not here for Loki's shenanigans. They reset the timeline Loki escaped from with a reset charge, which is a literal time bomb, before they pull him back through one of those nifty time portals.
What is this place?
Great question, Loki. This is the Time Variance Authority, or the TVA, a bureaucratic agency tasked with protecting the sacred timeline. Kind of like those people who fact-check Wikipedia entries, except for the entirety of space and time. The TVA and all of its agents were allegedly created by the Timekeepers, three god-tier powerful cosmic beings who we will attempt to explain further in just a minute, so hang out for that. The TVA regards Loki as a variant, somebody who has violated the sacred timeline, and according to them, Loki's actions just weren't canon. Now, while Loki is a space god, he has no power while he's in the TVA's sprawling facility, located somewhere near the end of time. In fact, none of the powers we've seen in the MCU prior to this seem to matter much here. Case in point, there's an entire desk drawer full of Infinity Stones.
How do you have these?
Oh, we actually got a lot of those. Yeah, some of the guys use them as paperweights.
Before this, we were made to understand that the Infinity Stones were the greatest power in the universe, and now we know that's just not true. The stones, including the Tesseract, are paperweights compared to the TVA's crushing bureaucracy, as Loki has arrived at this realization the hard way.
Even an Infinity Stone is useless here.
The TVA has him over a barrel, and none of his usual tricks are getting him out of hot water. Anyway, here's the setup. Loki messed with the sacred timeline, which lands him in front of a judge. He tries to blame the Avengers, who you'll recall also messed with the timeline quite a bit back in Endgame.
What they did was supposed to happen. You escaping was not.
So, space god or not, Loki is pretty screwed here. Enter TVA Agent Mobius, who is tracking a deadly variant who keeps killing the TVA Minutemen and stealing their reset charges. The dynamic between Mobius and Loki is what drives the show. Loki, being Loki, is always looking for ways to screw over Mobius, but Mobius is like us and totally aware of everything Loki has ever done and knows that he'll ultimately stab him in the back. Probably literally if he gets the chance. Anyway, Mobius saves Loki from being reset, which just means this version of Loki gets zapped out of existence. In exchange, he wants Loki's help in apprehending and probably resetting said deadly variant. And if you didn't see it coming a mile away,
The variant we're hunting is you.
we never see this Loki's face, but we do see him attack a team of Minutemen, kill them all, and steal their reset charge before the end credits roll. So we know this is a Loki, but there's a better than good chance that it's not the Loki that we know and love. But even if it is, seeing Tom Hiddleston playing an even more evil Loki would still be a lot of fun. There's been lots of talk of the MCU multiverse. WandaVision had that crazy Quicksilver switcheroo, there are lots of rumors about multiple Spiders-Men in Spider-Man No Way Home, and of course the next Doctor Strange movie literally has the word multiverse in the title, but this reveal of the multiple Loki should be the next indicator on just how much the multiverse will factor into the MCU Phase 4. If multiple versions of Loki can appear in this show, it's not much of a stretch to think that Wanda might find her lost children, or that more than one Spider-Mans might show up in that movie. I really don't know what the plural of Spider-Man is. Anyway, anyone who's read a Marvel comic can vouch that half the fun is watching the writers paint themselves into a dimension-shattering corner, only to have to weasel their way out. But I digress. We should mention here that this Loki is already a multiversal version since the Loki from the main timeline tried to pull one last fast one to open Avengers Infinity War. And this version of Loki understands all of this because Mobius had his entire life, including the end of it, on record for Loki to see. Presumably Mobius has a Disney Plus subscription. So basically, Loki knows if he doesn't agree to work with Mobius, he has no place on the timeline, meaning he'd be reset. All of this, of course, is in service to the Timekeepers, supposedly. There's a very Wizard of Oz vibe to these often mentioned but never seen immortal arbiters of the flow of time. Everyone in the TVA speaks of the Timekeepers, but we never actually see them. Loki wants an audience with them, god to god, and Mobius is kind of using that to help string Loki along, but we sense at the end of this there has to be a twist coming about these Timekeepers. Anyway, long ago there was a multiversal war in which multiple timelines battled for supremacy. The Timekeepers stopped all of that and created the Sacred Timeline and the TVA to manage it. Like we mentioned earlier, the MCU is now getting into the multiverse in a pretty major way, and in the cheeky Miss Minutes explainer, we get a picture for how things could truly get out of hand on a multiverse level.
Which, left unchecked, could branch off into madness, leading to another multiversal war.
And if you're wondering what the MCU's next big threat will be now that Thanos got snapped away, Multiversal War does have a pretty nice ring to it. Loop and the Eternals here to explain this. They've stayed hidden all this time until a threat worse than Thanos drew them out into the open. What could that be? A multiversal war seems like a pretty strong candidate, and if the MCU goes this way, an event like this could easily become the next Infinity Saga, bringing all of the heroes together to stop it, and breaking box office records along the way. Plus, Marvel Studios mastermind Kevin Feige told Empire this week that Loki will have a bigger, lasting effect on the MCU than WandaVision or Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and that makes sense seeing just how much of a multiverse story Loki is turning out to be. For now, at least, avoiding another multiverse war seems to be a pretty high priority for Loki and the TVA, but starting one seems like a high priority for the powers that be in charge of the MCU. So, TLDR, whenever a variant jumps their proper timeline, that screws everything up, and the TVA goes to retrieve that variant and strike that timeline from the record with a reset charge. But now there's an alternate dimensional god of mischief running around with a big bag of these fourth dimensional do-over bombs. What could go wrong? And of course, here's the part where we run down all the Easter eggs we spotted in this week's episode, and here's what we got. When Loki crash lands in the Mongolian desert, it's a lot like that time Tony flight tested the Iron Man Mark I suit. There's a scroll in the intake area of the TVA when Loki first gets there, another subtle reminder that there's a Secret Invasion series coming up. The MCU isn't stopping anytime soon. Keep those Disney Plus subscriptions coming. In Loki's file, his gender is listed as fluid, and considering the presence of Lady Loki in the comics, it seems very possible the alternate Loki might be female. That adorable talking clock Miss Minutes is voiced by Tara Strong, whose voice you've definitely heard in at least a dozen cartoons, whether you know it or not, but she's definitely well more known for her DC roles, like Raven on Teen Titans or Harley Quinn in the Arkham games, so it's fitting that someone who's played a part in so many different fictional universes is the one popping up to explain multiverses in the MCU. Timelines are magic. Agent Mobius, of course, comes from the pages of Marvel Comics, although that version was drawn to resemble Marvel Comics' Mark Grunwald, who at the time was the literal keeper of the Marvel Comics timeline. If you're curious what Josta Soda is because you're under the age of 30, it was a real soda that Pepsi-Cola made in the mid to late 90s, and that, combined with a quasi-anachronistic pseudo-analog technology at the TVA, does a nice job establishing how the rules of time and space really have no bearing over this organization as it exists outside of both. Okay, look, I know we spent the entire season of WandaVision playing Boy Who Cried Mephisto, but that stained glass window in the church with the horned devil character on it looks an awful lot like Mephisto. It could also be alluding to Loki, who sometimes has horns, or it could just be the regular old evil devil. When variants hop off their proper timeline, it creates a Nexus event. If you're wondering the last time we heard the word Nexus in the MCU, it was one of those fake commercials in WandaVision. Wanda is also a Nexus being in the comics, meaning that she's consistent across all other timelines in the multiverse, so we're wondering if Wanda is considered a variant now that she's been doing her recent multiversal activities and what have you. Yes, Loki was D.B. Cooper, the notorious real-world unnamed crook who hijacked a plane in 1971 and disappeared after parachuting out with 200 grand in ransom money and then never got found. Well, it turns out it was Loki who did it as a goof after he lost a bet to Thor. And finally, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Kang the Conqueror here. Some fans think this timekeeper bears a strong resemblance to the time-jumping ne'er-do-well from the pages of Marvel Comics. Anytime we're talking about time and space in the MCU, it stands to reason we need to mention Kang. This weapon the Minutemen come across before Mystery Loki kills them all is from the 3rd millennium, and of course, Kang hails from the 31st century in Marvel Comics. Coincidence? Probably not. Actor Jonathan Majors is set to play Kang the Conqueror in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, but that doesn't come out until 2023. Is it too early for the MCU to start teasing him? Do you think he'll show up in this show? And hey, while we're asking questions, what did you think of the Loki premiere? Are we about to see a female Loki? Will Kang the Conqueror start getting teased as far in advance as Thanos did? You think those timekeepers even exist? I don't. Let's get the theories going in the comments below. Anyway, thanks for watching this week's episode of Canon Fodder. For more Loki, catch up on his whole MCU story so far, and don't forget to follow and subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch. We'll see you next week, true believers. Excelsior!
Can you at least tell me what it is?
It's the Tesseract. Be very careful with it.
Sounds dumb.